Yeah, of course. And so first to lead into that, I want to briefly touch on what I felt the differences brought in this new cut because I felt like the first cut, the theatrical cut, was a very Marvel-esque movie. It was very this happens. You know, we have these two characters, we put them in a situation, they have a brawl, the better one wins. You know, and it's kind of like that whole. Because in Marvel, it's very just a sequence of events. It's a very formulaic approach to it. It's kind of like things are predetermined. And I think what draws people to film, as we touched on before in some of our conversations, is the idea of we are attracted to the person on the screen because they are us, yet they are not us. They are just a slightly removed version of us. So we get all the joy of experiencing their joy, but when they have their pain, when they have their, you have to have a hard decision to make, like it's slightly off from us. It's not, it's not us. So we're okay. I'm okay that I don't have to, choose whether to save this family or, destroy my values and snap this guy's neck as Superman did in the first film. And it's like we have that little distance, but the joy of watching comes in the suspense and not the suspense of the action, but the suspense of the decision. So in the first film in Man of Steel, or not Man of Steel, in the theatrical cut of this movie of Batman vs Superman, the suspense is there. It has a suspense. It's like, oh, the bomb blows up. It's like, what's going to happen? But all the suspense is leading to what are the characters going to do, and introducing these little nuggets and exploring this is now all of a sudden what are the characters going to choose? Who are the characters going to become? They are defining themselves. In the first movie, the characters are being dragged along from plot point to plot point by the story and the plot, and which I feel is the same in Marvel movies. They don't have as much agency as characters in the DC universe do. So so in this one, I think the biggest thing is the suspense of the choice and the decision, because now that you have, because it all comes from the dramatic irony. And I mean, it's basically, third grade literature stuff, that the ideas you learn, that the dramatic irony, the audience knows something that the characters don't. And so in the first cut, the audiences knew little bits of what the characters didn't, but that was all kind of brushed aside. And just because the characters just made these decisions that weren't really backed up, they weren't really true to the character. Like you said, in the Superman, everyone was like, why is he, have this vengeance against Batman? Like he's just another superhero. But learning that backstory and why and how, because you have to watch him make the decision and watch him, or maybe not the moment he makes a decision, but you have to watch him lead up to it. So you watch, the paraplegic man that was hurt by Superman. You watch his backstory. You get a little insight into his life. You look at Lex Luthor and you get a little insight into his relationships with the Congress members that he's working with, and his relationships and how he's, set up that meeting with Lois and kind of his intentions behind that. And then all of Batman stuff. And you see, his parents dying, and you see, him on the ground dealing with the effects of Superman's violence. And so it's kind of vice versa. And it's interesting too, because you can talk about the more direct ways in which Batman feels Superman's violence and the more indirect ways in which Superman just reads about the violence of Batman. And you can kind of like pick your side and who you believe is more justified. And that's such an interesting thing, because this whole time you're balanced between who do I trust, who do I not trust, like who's going to do this, and you're wondering who is going to stay true to their character, as in like their moral character, not their other character, and who's going to like make a decision that's going to change the course of the events. Whereas in the first one, it's all a suspense, and your suspense is only when are they going to fight? How are they going to fight? What are they going to destroy? Who's going to die? But in this one, it's like, who are they going to choose to become as individuals? And they get to kind of establish their own story. And to get back to what you were talking about, Liam, I think in Marvel, with such a formulaic and such a audience pleasing approach, it the Marvel universe isn't a bit of a bind, because they've established this brand, and it's a very positive brand. It's very, everyone's happy. Even the deaths that occur, there's that's happy. There's a sense of nostalgia. There's a sense of happiness and enjoyment, which I do appreciate that they do that in some ways, because it does bring back that childish joy of reading the comics. And I wasn't super big into Marvel comics, but I was into a lot of other graphic novels and things like that. And there is this kind of innocent, childish joy of watching page after page and Hulk smashing this building, Hulk killing this person, and then it's like, oh, you close it and you're having a great time. It's your little childhood Saturday morning. And so I do kind of appreciate that they had that aspect to them, whereas DC, I feel, has turned, and I think for the better, turned into a little more of an adult, a little more what those childhood readers want to see as they have progressed. And it's kind of, DC's kind of evolved with their audience, whereas Marvel is now targeting, my little brother who, never would have had this growing up. He's now in love with Marvel comics, and because it's kind of tailoring to that childhood generation. And I'm sure my kids will love Marvel comics. And it's kind of that innocent, childish aspect to it. And I think, but when you have that, I think then it becomes a more formulaic approach that Marvel is at a position where they can't stray from that. They've built such a brand and they've built such a reputation. They have 35 movies, whatever they have. They're big, generation spanning universe. And they're at a point where you can't all of a sudden have Doctor Strange, put in a position where he's like, do I kill, Iron Man or not? Like, there's no room for that level of independence within the characters. Their characters have to choose what they've set out. And I think it also stems from maybe their master plan is too big. Maybe they have too much of a formula. We're going to have this movie, and at the end of this movie, it's going to lead to this movie and this movie, and it's all going to lead up to this. And it's like, then when you actually get into directing those roles and acting those roles, you already know what's going to happen 3 movies down the line. You already know that this character doesn't truly have independence in that moment to make a decision. And you talk about like the one that's widely lauded as one of the more like critically acclaimed, like Civil War, where they do have those a semblance of those decisions and those independence and that kind of conflict. It's all so predetermined that it's really hard, I think. And I think that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like they've done it to themselves, but it's not necessarily something that they did intentionally, because now they're in a position where their directors, where their actors, where their producers don't really have the flexibility to let these characters make their own decisions. And so I think that becomes too predetermined. And I think maybe there is actually a benefit to having the disruption that the DC universe has had with all their changing cuts and all their changing this and that. There's so much up in the air, and it allows those characters to kind of forge a path for themselves within that world.
Yeah, I like that point about Civil War a lot too, because I mean, to me, when I watched that movie, it seems so separate from the others. Like it's almost as if they gave so much motivations to these characters they never had before in one movie, and it just exists on its own. Whereas, like if you watch Captain Marvel, which a lot of people like today, like you can see that it was placed exactly where it was for the reasons and the role she played in Endgame. So like I think it's very accurate what you're saying is that every single movie pointed towards this end goal, which is kind of disrupted, especially with this new idea that DC is talking about with Flashpoint and the multiverse.